KUAM News Hotspot is brought to you by
Pacific Points, Do More, Get More, and Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
The Menu, brought to you by King's Restaurant, always open, always local, and Ruby Tuesday Guam, home of the Fresh Garden Bar.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hub. I'm Nestor. Thank you for joining us. This week, we're going to talk about Guam's growing geopolitical significance as it continues to be underscored by the millions and millions and millions of dollars in federal funding from both Congress and the U.S. Defense Department, not just for the construction of Marine Corps Base Camp Laws, but also for a state-of-the-art missile defense system.
From the defense of Taiwan to the North Korean nuclear threat, the Indo-Pacific region is now clearly the focus of U.S. national defense strategy. And with that, the geopolitical importance of Guam and the Marianas grows larger with each day. Congress and the Defense Department are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into Guam again this year, not just to build the first new U.S. Marine Corps base in 50 years, but for a state-of-the-art missile defense system to protect not just the people of Guam, but the expanding military assets to be housed here. Former Indo-PACOM Commander Admiral Philip Davidson told Congress about the need to protect Guam and its strategic assets as far back as a year ago.
Guam is a target today. It needs to be defended, and it needs to be prepared for the threats that will come in the future.
He's talking primarily about China and its growing ambitions in the Indo-Pacific.
Most importantly, we all have to understand, Guam is U.S. territory. We have 170,000 U.S. citizens living on Guam. Their defense is homeland defense. We have 21,000 U.S. servicemen and women and DOD employees as well, plus their families. It's a deep water strategic port, major fuel stores, munition stores, command and control. It is a major power projection airfield for us in the region. We have to demonstrate that any ambition that China might have and any threat it might put forth towards Guam would come at cost.
The costs the Admiral speaks of are also of great concern to a new research institute, the Pacific Center for Island Security. Its aim is to ensure that islands, quote, have a voice amongst the cacophony that is geopolitical posturing. The group boasts an advisory panel that includes the former presidents of 4 Pacific Island nations. PCIS says it will provide independent analysis of the foreign policy and military strategic activities and interplay between and amongst the actors in the strategic competition in the Asia-Pacific.
And joining us now to talk about Guam's growing geopolitical significance are Dr. Robert Underwood and Leland Bettis of the newly formed Pacific Center for Island Security. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Let me just start out with you, Dr. Underwood. Tell us a little bit about this new organization that formed and what its purpose is.
Well, Leland and I and Ken Cooper have been in conversation about the changing dynamics of the geopolitical situation in the Pacific, specifically in Micronesia, and how fundamentally almost all relationships that we have with the United States and with other islands and other countries are all based on the strategic significance of Guam and the region. And so we wanted to, there's always been conversations about security issues, but almost always they're usually led by, especially locally, they're led by government officials and military officials. Nothing wrong with that, but we wanted to expand that. We wanted to kind of bring some research base, some academic expertise, some innovative ideas about it, and we've reached out to many people, not only in the U.S. but also in Australia and around the region. And we decided it's a fledgling think tank, is what it is. So we are endeavoring to create the opportunities for conversations and critiques about what is going on. Right now, what we have is, we usually have, like, for example, the recently passed National Defense Authorization Act. There's a number of provisions in there. We hear about them. We know they pass through Congress. Sometimes Congress doesn't tell us everything. Sometimes our own delegate is not really directly involved, so we don't know what's going on. Then we have to kind of put it in totality. What is going on? What do people have in mind? What are the threats that they see, and how does this address those threats, or how it changes our point of view about the region? So we've decided to do this, and we have, in order to accomplish this, we've invited an advisory group that consists of former President Tommy Rumengasao of Republic of Palau, former president of the FSM, Manny Mori, former president of the RMI, Hilda Heine, former governor of the CNMI, Juan Babalta, as well as Anote Tong, who was the former prime minister of Kiribati. So it's a wide-ranging group of people, and we're endeavoring to kind of add to the conversation, enrich the conversation, and offer alternative views, so that we don't always feel like we're just kind of being led down a path that we're not sure about. So obviously, there's a lot of initiatives that are going on right now. The Pacific Island Initiative, President Biden had a meeting in the White House. China has introduced a number of initiatives into the South Pacific, and of course, China's presence. And we're trying to make sense of that, not for China and not necessarily for the U.S., we're trying to make sense of that for ourselves. We're trying to understand that from right here in our home region, hence Pacific Center for Island Security, and hence our logo, which Leland has there, which has a big breadfruit leaf, sort of like, nothing unites all of Micronesia like breadfruit. And so that's the symbolization of our perspective and what we hope to offer the general community.
Leland, before we get into some of those issues that Dr. Underwood mentioned, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us what your role will be as the director of this group.
I'm just one of the directors with Dr. Underwood and Dr. Cooper. But I think, if we look from the lens of history, no power persists forever. We have all grown up, all of us, in a period when the United States has been the predominant, not just regional power, but world power. That is changing, and that's recognized by the United States with the rise of China. I mean, China is a phenomenon. In the last 50 years, since relations with the West have opened up, it has done incredible things in terms of minimizing poverty or addressing poverty. Today, they are the world's largest producer of steel. But their population still is not well off. I mean, they have an average income that's 25% of Americans, and their progress will continue to move forward. And what does that mean? One of the things that means is they are adopting military power. And how does that work in relation to the United States, which has dominated the Pacific region for the last 80 years, since the last regional conflict that was part of the war? So, we're looking at this and trying to make sense of it from where Guam fits in. We know that Guam has been at the crossroads of history in the past in conflicts, and so we just want to try to make sense of it in relation to what we see as this clear competition between the United States and China in the Pacific region.
Yeah, Dr. Underwood, you mentioned the NDAA, which was recently passed by the House. It's pouring, again, hundreds of millions of dollars into Guam, not just for the construction of Marine Corps Base Camp Blas, but also for this state-of-the-art missile defense system. What's your big takeaway from all this money that's pouring into Guam?
And also add to that, I think a lot of people kind of put out of focus the fact that Japan is putting in a lot of money for this, because Japan wants the Marines out of Okinawa. So that's not part of the NDAA, but that's part of the money that's being spent in Guam in order to accommodate the movement of the Marines from Okinawa to here. Well, the big takeaway is, of course, the thing that attracts our attention the most is the construction at Camp Blas and all the issues that arise from that. And there are a number of issues relative to digging up the earth and what's going to happen with the firing range. But the more substantial issue, I think, from a regional perspective, is the money that's being earmarked or eyed for missile defense. So what are we going to do? What does missile defense mean for us? And what does it mean for the island? And how is that going to work? So I think they're spending almost $400 million to take a look at it. And it's not a done deal yet, but that means that there is some strong conversation and discussion inside Washington whether this is a road that they want to take down. And similarly, there should be avid conversation here in Guam where this is a road that we should also support, because that anti-missile defense network contemplates having 19 sites in Guam, and not all of them on military property now. It also maybe gives us a sense of false security that somehow or other this is a system that's going to protect the island from every possible missile attack, and that's not necessarily true, and it's also unproven. This is not kind of like the Iron Dome that exists in Israel to kind of insulate it from attacks from their neighbors, and even there where you have the Iron Dome, it doesn't always work. So that's the kind of analysis that we want to give. We want to have people have that conversation. We want them to know what is the intent behind missile defense. Certainly, it's pretty obvious that the missile defense system is to protect military assets. It's not to protect the mooning necessarily. It's meant to protect the military assets.
All right, I think we've got
that are on island. The totality of that right now is as part of the COFA negotiations, is that the U.S. is avidly negotiating diversion points where they can set up quickly. It's sort of in anticipation of the worst case scenario, which is will suffer a missile attack and then they have to survive that missile attack and operate from somewhere else, or have their assets so diverted and across the region that you can't really attack just one area. So there's a whole range of issues attended to that. And sometimes I think, we sort of simplify that, and it's a little bit more complex than that, let alone whether the technology is going to work.
All right. We got to take a quick break, but we'll be back with more of our discussion. I want to talk more about the missile defense system right after this. Okay, and we're back. Leland, before the break, we were talking about the missile defense system and all the money that the Defense Department and the Congress is going to be sending to Guam for that. But one of the other provisions of the NDAA was that the Defense Department will be required to post a senior defense official to oversee this missile defense system. What's the significance of that, Leland?
So I think some of this comes from the complexities that Dr. Underwood is talking about. What we're really talking about in the missile defense architecture for Guam is what they're calling the next generation of missile defense. Currently, the United States missile defense systems have been prepared for, although they are not 100% foolproof. They're prepared for ballistic missiles, which basically do a huge parabola in the sky and try to intercept them as they sort of reach the apex up in the atmosphere. The new missiles that are a threat not just to Guam and the region, but potentially the United States, are hypersonic missiles, which there is no existing defeat system designed for. Now there are ideas in mind, and these involve space sensors. They involve sensors on the ground, but ultimately you have to have one missile hit another missile, and how do you do that? So this is a very complex problem. There have been a lot of questions about whether the Missile Defense Agency, which has been very secretive about its tests, to manage this. These these questions about MDA's abilities both at the congressional side as well as within the Department of Defense. So I think, there's been an architecture proposed for Guam for this next generation missile defense. And the NDAA for FY23 proposes, about $400 million for an independent research agency to evaluate if this is the right architecture, this is the right system to be set up.
Yeah, I think Leland's frozen a little bit, but can you hear me, Nestor?
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Underwood. Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah. So,
yeah, go ahead.
So in that sense, just also understanding that the missile defense sort of industry is flooding the island and flooding the world with lots of different scenarios and advocacy for missile defense, so that when people talk about the billions of dollars that will be spent in Guam as a result of this military buildup, actually most of it goes to those technical systems, and most of that money will be spent elsewhere. So the whole idea that somehow or other this is a major economic boon to the island also has to be deconstructed, because I'm not sure, I'm almost sure that that is not the case, let alone the construction in Camp Blas and the issues that pertain to that as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you guys just to respond to, this, you hear, it's a good thing we got some missile defense system that's going to protect us, but it's a bad thing that we need one, What are your thoughts on that, Leland?
Well, you wouldn't have an anti-missile system unless there was a missile threat. So clearly, I think, everyone understands there's a missile threat. What is that missile threat? I mean, it's massive from the Chinese side. The numbers are staggering. And I don't think any of the systems that are being prepared today anticipate that all those incoming missiles, if they were launched, would be intercepted. So I think, you've got to just deal with that issue. Congressman Underwood talked about, these divert airfields throughout the region. I think those are Exhibit A, that the U.S. military does not anticipate that places like Anderson will be usable all the time during the event of a conflict. I think the other important thing that at least, just think about is that, it's unlikely that, or most of these missiles are going to be directed at the bases if there were a conflict. I don't think that anyone seriously thinks that, civilian targets in Guam by themselves, that would be the place where, an adversary wasted missiles. They're going to be targeting the military infrastructure in Guam because it is a very significant threat, both out of the port as well as Anderson Air Force Base. I mean, Anderson has the largest petroleum, oil, and lubricant inventory in the entire inventory of the U.S. Air Force. It's got a massive weapons storage area, over 100,000 different weapons at Anderson Air Force Base, and then you add naval magazine for the various subsurface ships like submarines. So, any adversary that was engaged in war with the United States would probably spend most of their missiles directed at military bases or at places like command and control or anti-missile systems.
Yeah, you got a quick thing to add to the good thing, bad thing, Dr. Underwood?
Well, it's not a good thing in either event. That's my opinion. My opinion that you don't want to be a target, and B, the only reason why we're a target is because we are really the largest weapons capacity and fuel capacity in the region. I mean, it's enormous, as Leland has outlined. So how do we utilize that to our advantage is a government-to-government issue. But what does that mean for us as a people is a separate issue. And that's what we aim to do in the conversations that we will be sponsoring through the Pacific Center. What does this mean in the totality of things? I think people forget that there was a time when people thought, well, you can't really develop anti-missile system. So they had an ABM treaty between the Soviet Union and the United States. Well, that's gone by the wayside because most people think that the more anti-missile systems you develop, you're actually creating the opportunity for a new arms race. Because if you develop an anti-missile system, then your ostensible adversary is going to spend a lot of time trying to develop a new missile that will defeat that anti-missile system. So what happens is it doesn't reduce the possibility of conflict, it actually enhances it. And we have to kind of seriously think about that. And of course, we will do that in the course of time. Also, the nature of the military presence and the nature of the military expenditure. Well, here we have on Guam, we have enormous rise in housing costs, and it struck me as ironic. So now we all know what the source of the rise in the housing costs are. It's because of the military presence and their effect on the market. And yet, when we have sometimes conferences, people will say, we have a housing shortage. Well, no, yeah, we have a housing shortage. And by the way, we've lost population in the past 5 years. So I don't know where that, all of a sudden, where that housing shortage comes in. But really, the issue is the effect of the military on our economy. So that means that hopefully a future NDAA will seriously address those issues, because that affects the quality of our lives.
All right, we got to take another quick break, but we'll be back to talk about Taiwan and the strategy of the island chain right after this break.
All right.
Okay, we're back. And as I mentioned before the break, we wanted to talk about China and Taiwan and the island chain strategy. First of all, Leland, tell me, what's your take on the Taiwan situation, and how soon do you think Beijing might make a move?
I'm not a prognosticator on, when they might attack Taiwan, but I think in general, the U.S. strategy in the Pacific is to create what's called a first island chain defense. And if you think about the islands running from Japan through Taiwan down to the Philippines and Indonesia, the United States is trying to hem in China and try to keep it contained in the South China Sea and in the East China Sea. So Taiwan fits into that in a very particular way. So all those countries in the first island chain are very sensitive to China. All of them, their largest trading partner for imports and exports, I think throughout the first island chain, is going to be China. So, they're very sensitive to where the Chinese are. Where does Taiwan fit into that? At present, the United States is the country at the forefront of suggesting that it would defend Taiwan. I think most people in the first island chain do not want to see that conflict. Most of them want to have peaceable relations with China. Most of them want to have peaceable relations with the United States, and they see both of those militaries as balancing each other in the region. Taiwan is of particular importance and significance to Guam, I think, because it raises the chances of miscalculation and risk to Guam. And that if the United States were to go alone in confronting China, clearly Guam would be a target. So in whatever scenario we see, movement around the Chinese and Taiwan and any escalation, I think Guam, is a significant target in that instance.
Yeah, Dr. Underwood, I think Guam and Micronesia are part of the second island chain strategy. And you've written about Micronesia and the Western Pacific as the big American lake. Can you interrelate those?
Sure. Basically, it's not quite the American lake that it used to be, because there's a lot of pathways through it. And one of the pathways, of course, is the fact that the second island chain, the notion was that you could keep the Chinese from not politically and economically advancing, but militarily through their naval forces, keep them within the first island chain. So now it's pretty obvious that they're here somewhere. They have the capacity to come here and wage war, and in a way where the outcome is not clear. And so then the next island chain, of course, you go all the way to Hawaii. And many, many years ago, back in the 90s, when the Chinese Navy tried to prove that they could go all the way across the Pacific, they barely made it. Now that's no longer the case. They have aircraft carriers, sophisticated aircraft carriers, and they have a submarine force. Where our missile defense system might be directed at incoming traffic from the west, the submarines could be shooting at us from the east. there's just a whole different environment now. So the idea of the first island chain, second island chain, and third island chain is sort of obviated by these technological changes and the capacities of the what they call the People's Liberation Army Navy. So and going back to Taiwan, obviously, Taiwan is in the first island chain, and in a way, of course, very sympathetic to Taiwan because they're our friends, and we hope that no harm befalls them. But at the same time, recognizing that an actual full-scale defense of Taiwan by the United States would certainly involve using assets from Guam and make Guam more of a target.
All right, we've got to take one last break, but when we come back, I want you guys to talk a little bit about this big kickoff event that you guys have planned for March. We'll be right back.
Okay.
Okay, we are back, and we are with Dr. Robert Underwood and Leland Bettis with the Pacific Island. What is your? Sorry, I'm
Pacific
my
Center
notes.
for Island Security.
Sorry, yes, thank you. Pacific Center
No
for
problem.
Island Security, and you've got a big kickoff event in March. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, we're actually hoping to, and of course we're in the process of securing funding for this, but we're hoping certainly as an initial kickoff event to engage in regional conversations with the foreign ministers of the Micronesian countries, principally the compact states, but could include other countries in Micronesia, and that's what we're hoping to do as a major event. But leading up to that event, we intend to have mini conferences and podcasting and Zoom calls, and using different media on Guam to introduce some guests that we have in mind that are coming from off island, some missile defense experts, some people who have looked at this for a while, as well as people who have looked at the international situation in this part of the world. So we're reaching out and making many partnerships with similar think tanks in Australia. And of course, we have contacts with people in Hawaii as well, people that we know, the East-West Center, even the Asian Pacific Center for Security Studies, which is headed by Admiral Gumatauto. So we're looking at a kind of a rich environment and hoping to have some very rich conversations coming out of that.
All right, you got about 30 seconds, Leland. Anything you want to add?
Thank you for your interest in this issue, Nestor. I think it's an important one for Guam, and we hope to add to the conversation over time.
All right, thank you both for joining us, Dr. Robert Underwood and Leland Bettis of the Pacific Center for Island Security. I got it right, yeah?
You got it.
Thanks for joining us. I'm
Thank
Nestor
you.
Leconte. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you again next week on The Hub.